and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. The last time I was here, I showed you pictures of instruments, and I brought in an Israeli flute that shepherds use when they're out with their flocks in the fields, and I explained it a little bit. And the other instruments I included were the trombones, the basses, the violins. I had pictures of all of the traditional instruments used in bands and orchestras. Now, I didn't have a chance to talk about my trombone, so I want to start with my trombone. I had shown you a picture of a trombone that had some complicated tubing, and I pointed to this one and said, this is a traditional slide trombone. I wanted to go into this particular instrument a little bit. There's a story behind it. I don't play brass instruments, but I went to a church service where I used to attend, and I did solos every week. And a man came to me toward the beginning of the service and said, Pat, I'm so excited. I bought you a tremendous gift. You will absolutely love it. And not only that, it only cost me $5 at a pawn shop. And I thought to myself, my goodness, what could this be? And he handed to me this trombone. And he says, now it doesn't play, you can't play it. I only paid $5 for it, but it's a wonderful gift. He says, you can put it up on your wall as an art piece. And I took one look at it with its dents and its bruises, and I says, I don't think this one's going on the wall, because I didn't tell him that. And so I took the trombone and I thanked him for it, and then I thought, what am I going to do with this trombone? It's banged up, it's bruised, it looks awful, the lacquer's all worn off, it's possibly been abused. And then I started working with it before the service began. And the first thing I did was I picked it up and I let the slide drop. And the slide went down easily, so I could move the slide up and down. And of course, if there's any dents in the slide and you can't use the slide, then you can't play it, because that's how you get your tones, with the slide lengthening and shortening as you move the slide up and down. But the slide was fine. And then I took and I blew into the instrument, and it made a wonderful, wonderful tone, very easy to get air into it, very easy to make tones out of it. And I thought, you know, this was at one time a very excellent trombone. I'm not a brass player, and I could play this trombone, so it had to be a very magnificent instrument at one time. So I did a little work with it. The slide lock doesn't work, so I jury-rigged the slide so that it wouldn't fall down inappropriately. And there were splits in the metal. You may not be able to get it, but I have bandaged them up kind of with strapping tape, because there were splits. And there are different dents in various places, which of course I could do nothing with. And it will fall apart if you don't hold it just right. It will fall apart. There goes the mouthpiece. That was my fault. But you see, it doesn't take anything to pull this instrument apart, because it's just not stable. And there goes the bell. So anyway, I fooled around with it, and then I took it home to my twin sister, because not only is she a piano player and organ player, but she has played trombone as well. And I showed it to her, and she played it, and she says, this is an absolutely wonderful trombone. It has a terrific tone. It plays easily. At one point, this was a first-rate instrument. Now, I've always kept this trombone. I've always loved this trombone. And what I've done with it is that I've done sermons on it. The way that people are bruised, the way that they get hurt, the way that they get damaged, and things that happen to them in their lives that are hurtful. And yet at the same time, this instrument, despite the fact that it's been abused, that's the only explanation I have for the things that have happened to it, its dents and all of that, that it wasn't well taken care of. And people, sometimes they get hurt, they get abused, but they have their inner dignity. They still can produce. They still can do wonderful things, and God can heal them. So I've used this as a kind of an example of that in sermons. And usually when I finish with a sermon and I'm using this trombone as an example, I will carry the instrument down to the front of a congregation all together, and I will hold it. I don't let anyone else hold it, because if you don't hold it right, it will fall apart. But I will hold the instrument, and then I'll invite the congregation down to look at it, and they will come, and they'll take part of it, and they'll say, "Oh, there's a dent right here. I know what happened in my life. I got dented too. I know where this ding came from. I know what happened that caused it." And they relate it to their lives. And so it's a very handy instrument in order for me to be able to show people that just because they've been hurt, abused, or in other way ill-treated, it doesn't mean that they have lost their worth or they've lost their dignity, and they still can do good things and they can heal. If it was possible for this instrument to be repaired, if I had the money to put into it, and if it were possible to do that, it would be a magnificent trombone. Its tone is beautiful, and it's easy to play, and I'm just sorry that all of this bad stuff, whatever it was, happened to it. But I treasure it, and it's a wonderful example about human beings and their worth. Now, I'm going to go on from that, and I'm going to start to teach you how to read music. That is, how to understand the timing of music. When I was teaching children, I developed a way that I could teach them how to read notes, how to know what timing, the whole note, the half note, the quarter note, eighth note, 16th notes, and so forth. How do you read it? How can you time it? And I developed a method based on a donut. I call it my donut method of music teaching. Here is a picture of a donut right here. And here is a better picture of a donut. And the way that I got the donut was an idea. If you can take something that's whole, like a whole donut, a whole pizza, or whatever, then you can cut it up in various parts and illustrate how notes are actually subdivided. It's a matter of fractions. So here's the donut. How did I get a picture of a donut like that? Well, I went into a place where I was on staff, and I bought a dozen of those sugary donuts that you get, the small ones, and I took one out and took it to a photocopier and just plunked it on the photocopier. I lowered the top of it just a little bit, but not much, because I didn't want to smush the donut, and I took a photocopy of a donut, and there it is, a white sugary donut. I chose the white because I wanted it to show up. And then this represents a whole. You have a whole donut, like you have a whole piece of pie, or you have a whole pizza. It's whole. This is the whole donut. And if you're looking at music, there is such a thing as a whole note. The whole note is just a circle. That's all. It's just a circle. The whole note is usually held for 4 beats. So I wrote a whole note. This is just a shortened staff. It has the 5 lines. It's just not very wide. I put the whole note on it, and it's usually held for 4 beats. Now, I say usually. Remember, everything that I tell you will be the usual thing, because you can always change things. You know, there's always an exception to the rule. If I put a little dot beside that, just a little dot, that whole note would change to 6 beats instead of 4. I'll explain that a little later on. But here's a whole note counted for 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the usual. Now, supposing, I'm going to take this off, and we'll deal with halves. I cut the donut in half. Now, my sister said to me, as I remember her saying, "How did you get the halves and the quarters and the eighths? Did you keep cutting the donut and photographing it?" And after laughing myself silly, I said, no, I just took photocopies of the donut and then I cut the photocopies in half or in quarters. Otherwise, I would have had a crummy mess on the machine, and that wouldn't have been good. So you take the half of a whole. It takes 2 halves to make a whole. This half and this half would make the whole donut if you put it together. These are half notes. You have the circle and you have a stem on each one. 2 halves are equal to 1 whole. And I know this is going to seem real simple to you, but that's okay. I want to make it as simple as I can. It may seem oversimplified, but if you're a child watching, it'll make a lot more sense. If you're an adult watching and you teach children music, it's a way of teaching them that'll make sense to them. So 2 halves make the whole. Now I'm going to add another one. What about quarters? That would be next. I have the donut cut in 4 pieces. Those are quarters. Quarter notes are black. The circles are black instead of white, and they all have a stem on them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where the half notes were equivalent to 2 beats each, as down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, the quarters are equal to 1 beat apiece, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that equals a whole. 4 quarters equal a whole, 2 halves equal a whole, and of course a whole equals a whole. So we've subdivided already from whole to half to quarters. Well, this donut is going to be subdivided even further. We can now take the quarters and we can subdivide to 8. You can imagine what a hard time I would have had I decided to keep cutting that donut. Instead, I use a ruler and a pencil and I've got it. The 8th notes have the black, and then the stems, and then there's a flag on them. This note has a flag on it. All of these little notes, these are 8th notes, and you count them like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you get the whole. The 8 of the 8th notes make a whole. 4 of the quarter notes make the whole. And what you're doing is you're taking a quarter note and you're cutting a quarter note in half to make it an 8th note. So you can read that 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and when you get through, you have your whole note. Okay, so and there are different ways of writing it. These are 2 8th notes together. You join them. You have the 2, and they each have a stem, and you just draw a line across the stem. Or you could have 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, a stem on each one, and a line across. They're all 8th notes, or you can draw them individually. They're all 8th notes, so you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You have your whole. A donut cut in 8 parts would mean you wouldn't get very much. These notes are short. You know, they're not held very long. So there is your 8th. Now you can do it further, because you can divide them up into 16ths. By now, you really have shriveled that donut up a whole lot. Instead of having 1 flag for the 16th notes, you have 2. So here's your black note, here's your stem, and instead of 1 flag, which would have made it an 8th note, you add another flag, and it makes it a 16th note. Now, there are 4 16th notes to 1 beat, and that's usual. There's always an exception to the rule. There's always a way to change that, but we're talking about what the usual is, and this is like a beginning music class, so I only want to cover the basics. So this is 1 beat, this is 2 beats, this is 3 beats, this is 4 beats, but 4 notes to each beat, and you can count it. I had a violin teacher. Actually, he was a music teacher for a school, but his main instrument was a violin. And he had a way of showing students how to count 1-a-tizza, 2-a-tizza, 3-a-tizza, 4-a-tizza. That's the easiest way to do it. 4 notes, 1 beat, and it will have that double flag. You can put 4 together, or you can have them single with the 2 flags on it. In each case, they have 2 flags on it. So 4 16th notes is the equivalent of 2 8th notes. And 2 8th notes is the equivalent of 1 quarter note. And 4 quarter notes is the equivalent of a whole note. And 2 8th notes, 2 8th notes is the equivalent of a quarter. 2 quarters would be the equivalent of a half, and 2 half notes would be the equivalent of a whole. It's just a case of taking something that's whole and subdividing it and subdividing it again and subdividing it again. And you can do it as many times as you want to do it. There are 32nd notes, which would be 3 flags. There are 64th notes that would be 4 flags, and it can get very, very complicated. And I don't want to get that complicated for this, but this gives you an idea of what it is. So let's subdivide some more, and I just want to show you how that goes. Whole note, 4 beats. Half note, 2 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. Quarter notes, 1 beat each, together 1, 2, 3, 4, all equaling the whole. Then 8th notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and equaling the whole. 2 8ths would equal the quarter. 4 8th notes would equal the half, and then of course you get another 4 equaling the whole. Then when you break it down into 16ths, 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats, 4 beats. Now when you are writing music, or let me show you this way. Four 16ths, but I've repeated it 4 times. The 8ths, the quarters, the half, and the whole. When you take a look at music, now I'm the worst mathematician in the world. I just am really an awful mathematician. But I can understand this because you just take something and you break it down and you break it down and you break it down. Now, I want to step up to the whiteboard for just a moment to show you some things. Let me take these 2 down. Okay, now I'm at the whiteboard. Supposing that you want to write some music, you can do that. You can write it and write it in combinations. Let me just put that down to balance it. Supposing, now I have here a treble clef. I have here a bass clef. I'm going to be working from the treble clef because the treble clef is what the woodwinds play off from. So supposing I want to put in couple of flats here, and supposing I want to write in a time signature. Now this is important, this whole section of music. When you look at a piece of music, this is going to be the first thing that you see. It's on the top line, sometimes they repeat it every single line, but this is your key signature, and this is your time signature. And they're both together. The key signature is how many flats and sharps you have. If you don't have any sharps and flats, nothing is written in, it's just blank. So you know then that you're in the key of C, because the key of C has no sharps and it has no flats. But I have 2 flats here, so this music is written in the key of B flat. F is 1 flat and B flat is 2 flats, and the flat happens to be on the B line, and the other happens to be on the E space, B and E, B flat, E flat, and it's considered to be in the key of B flat. And this 3/4 tells me the time that I want. So I want 3 beats to a measure, and it's the equivalent of 3 quarter notes. 4 equals the quarter note. Remember, we have 4 quarters to a whole. So 4 is your quarter note, and 3 is how many you have in a measure. So how can I get 3 beats to a measure? 3 beats to a measure is actually a waltz tempo. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So how can I do that? There are different note combinations that I can do to get that. I can have a half note and a quarter note. That equals 3. This is my bar line. I could have even rests. Let me go over the rests. Rests are drawn something like this. It's not a note. That means you don't play on that beat. You rest. Somebody else is playing instead. You could have a rest that's on this line here, and it's pointing up. That means you don't play for 2 beats. That's usually considered to be a half rest, 1 half. Remember, your half notes are 2, and so you have 2 beats. My bar line is here. That's a whole measure rest. 1, 2, 3. That's 2 beats. 1, 2, 3. You don't play in that measure at all. Somebody else does instead. Or you could have a rest that hangs down off this line that's a D. That hangs down. That's a whole rest. It's considered to be the whole rest. The easy way to remember it is that it's hanging down because it's heavier, which means it has more beats to it. So that's a whole beat, a whole measure of rest. For these, you hold it for 3 beats because the time signature is in 3/4, and it's 3 basically, like a waltz tempo. You have 3 beats and you're not playing. Those are the rests. Well, we could do it another way too. We could have here's 3 beats. You have 3 quarter notes. Here's 3 beats, put on the bass clef. 1 and 2 and 3 and. They're all 8th notes. I can do it this way, or I can do it this way, you see. Or I could add 16th notes. I might want a combination, put the bar line down, 1 and 2 and 3. This is a quarter note, 1 beat. These are all half notes. There's 3 beats right there. There's just so many ways that you can do it. Any note combination that you can think of, you can write in, but it has to be equivalent to what's here in the key signature. The key signature is telling you how many beats to the measure, and it's also telling you what kind of notes. So it would be the equivalent of 3 quarter notes. If I had 4/4 time, it would be 4 beats and 4 quarter notes. And a lot of music is written 4/4. And there's another way to show 4/4. You can show 4/4 just by writing a C. If I were to put, well, let me see, another treble clef, C. That means it's in 4/4 time. That's the easy way to write it. And no sharps, no flats, that means it's in the key of C. Should I put a sharp in, like for example an F sharp, it's now in the key of G. And every time you play that F, and this is the line that it's on, you're going to automatically sharpen that note. I could remind you by putting a little sharp beside it, but I don't have to because it's already in the key signature, and you always look at the key signature first. Now, I think we're about out of time, and I don't want to push it too much further because I don't want you to be confused. So thank you so much for watching, and next time I'm going to actually show you how to start playing a piece. We'll read the music and we'll play it. So hopefully you'll be watching. We'll see you then.